Hello, Year 11, and welcome to your Walking Talking Mock 4, Paper 2, Question 3. Now, in the last Walking Talking Mock, we did Question 5, and today we're going to be focusing on Question 3 because I think it's a question that you still get loads of marks. It only uses one source, so then you don't have to be reading two sources and then going back on yourselves. It's focusing on a skill that you guys have been doing since year 7, and you only spent about 15 minutes on it. So I think it's just one of those questions where I think you can pick a lot of marks up. So we're going to go for question 3 now. So turning to our paper, first of all, so we need to turn to question 3, so let's find it. It's not question 1, it's not question 2, it is question 3. Okay. Now, for question 3, it's really important that you are clear in ensuring that you pick up the right source. Okay. So the first thing that I want to make sure that I do is that I read the top bit that tells me one of the where to find the lines. Okay. So we want to focus specifically on the lines. So you need to refer only to source A, so I'm going to highlight source A, from lines 12 to 23. So before I even read the question, I do always turn over to the source and I find lines 12 to 23. Now, one of the things that AQA do is they do give you where those specific lines are. So look at the numbers on the side. They don't go up always in 5s. They tell you like you've got a 7 there, you've got 12, you've got 23. And they do this just to make sure that you're not spending ages counting your lines. So I look for 12, it's there, and I look for 23. So I'm going to draw a square around this. Now, during the Walking Talking Mock, year 11, this feels like this takes forever. If you were doing this and you get used to doing this in the exam, it will take you seconds. So I tend to label this as question 3. Now, before I read the extract that I need to analyze, I always read the question first. I think this massively ensures that you know what you are looking for as you are reading the extract. So I've got here, how does the writer use language to describe the train crash? Now, I'm going to highlight the key words in the question. So I always have, for example, the word how. It wants you to be able to explain, to tell me the why, the how. The writer is then using language. Language is the skill that they are looking for. This question tests your ability to analyze language. And then it says to describe the train crash. So the language that I'm trying to find is ultimately describing this train crash. Now, when I do this, the first thing that I write or I think about, I might write it in my resource book or I write it here just to remind me, is that I like to use TP for this question. Now, if you have your knowledge books at home, when you are revising at home, remember that you've got that in your knowledge books. So TP is that idea of using a technique, evidence, purpose, and then exploring the effects. And in your knowledge books, you've got loads of sentences that help you kind of write your responses in a clear way. The use of this creates an image, highlights, conveys, emphasizes, implies, symbolizes, reveals. And then you've also, in your knowledge books, you've got a reminder of how to use magic circles to help you make sure that you are zooming in on that language and analyzing that language in detail. Okay, so I'm going to put that to the side. So I've got TP. Now, one of the things that I always try to remember is that when I'm doing my purpose, this is where I want to make sure that I'm always answering the question or the focus of the question. Answering the focus. The T helps me ensure that I'm talking about the techniques that I'm focusing on specific techniques, but the purpose ensures that I'm answering the focus of the question, which is the train crash. The other thing that I think is good to remember is that question 3 is 12 marks. So it weighs heavier than paper 1 question 2. Now remember, paper 1 question 2 also asks you to analyze language. So what this is suggesting is that I do need to make sure that I'm probably looking at a range of techniques, and that I'm looking to write something between 2 to 4 TP paragraphs that are really developed, that I'm really explaining my ideas when it comes to language. So I've looked at the question. It wouldn't take me 5 minutes to annotate my question, but it's about thinking what is it asking me to do and how to go about the question first. The next thing that I do is I go back to the source. And before I read the section that they ask me to read, I do double check that I've got the right source. Look at this, source A, source A. I highlight it. But I also like reading this introduction that tells me something about the source, so then I know what I'm actually reading about. So I'm going to read that bit, then I'm going to read the extract, and then I'm going to start quickly planning and writing my idea. So source A, of course source A, is an extract from a travel book in which Peter Fleming, now I'm going to highlight Fleming, describes his train journey on the Trans-Siberian Railway in 1933. The journey is over 9,000 kilometers and takes more than a week to complete. So it's quite a long journey, 9,000 kilometers, and takes very long to complete. Now he's on a train journey. So I've got this idea of, I understand that my source is about a train journey. Now that's important because my question, how does the writer use language to describe the train crash, suggests that there's going to be a train crash, and the section that I'm reading is going to have a train crash. Okay, so let's read the extract. All of a sudden, there was a frightful jarring, followed by a crash. I sat up in my berth. From the rack above me, my heaviest suitcase was cannonaded down, catching me with fearful force on either kneecap. This is the end of the world, I thought, and in addition, they have broken both my legs. My little world was tilted drunkenly. The window showed me nothing except a few fields. It was 6 o'clock. I began to dress. I felt very much annoyed, but I climbed out of the carriage in a refreshingly spectacular world, and the annoyance passed. The Trans-Siberian Express train sprawled foolishly down the embankment. The mail van and the dining cart, which had been in front, lay on their sides at the bottom. Behind them, the 5 sleeping cars, headed by my own, were disposed in attitudes which became less and less grotesque until you got to the last, which had remained primly on the rails. 50 yards down the line, the engine which had parted company with the train was dug in, snorting steam, on top of the embankment. It had a defiant and naughty look. It was definitely conscious of indiscretion. Now this is a really interesting way to describe a train crash. Initially, because I think there is an element of a contrast here. So I'm going to write here, contrast. And I like to draw kind of the way that I think an idea is being presented. At the beginning, it feels that the train crash is actually a bit scary, a bit frightful, a bit worrying. However, that is quite quickly change to something of a bit of, it's not happy, but the train crash is described in a bit more like an annoyance, it's a bit silly, it's a bit foolish. And you get that because he's using almost like a bit of a sarcastic tone. My little world was tilted drunkenly. There's a bit of humour in his language. The window showed me nothing except a few fields. It was 6 o'clock. He begins to dress. I felt very much annoyed. Now, I'm going to be honest. If I was in a train crash, I would be terrified. I'd be worried. Who's been hurt? Who's been injured? But I climbed out of the carriage into a refreshingly spectacular world, and the annoyance passed. So the train crash is described more as a bit of an inconvenience, something that was clumsy, something that was silly, something that shouldn't have happened. But it does start with a bit of a kind of violent, sudden semantic field. So identifying that contrast is the kind of thing that you might write to try to get into that top band of a 12 out of 12. If you don't see that contrast, if you notice that it's a bad train crash and then you notice that it's a good train crash, the way that I might structure my answer is that I would start with a TP paragraph that looks at the negative side of that train crash, and the positive sides of that train crash, and just write the writer contrast. Now, when you go to question 3, or a language question, one of the things that I've noticed throughout the years is that they always have either similes, that they always have personification, that they always have a metaphor. They always have at least one of those techniques. The other thing that they do tend to have is a contrast. And if you're able to identify that contrast, it tends to be pupils that get that grade 9 that are able to see that contrast. So for example, there is a source for paper 2 that is about surfers. And in that source, we can see how the sea is contrasted with the skill of the surfers. And that might be something that you want to look when analysing language. Now here, we are looking at this train crash, and the train crash is presented as both scary, but also that is more of a nuisance, more of an annoyance. And if you're able to write about that contrast, that is amazing. But imagine you're in the exam, and all you can see is like certain techniques. So I'm only going to focus on looking for a few. Now, the first thing that I notice is this idea that it starts with all of a sudden. Now, that reminds me actually a tiny bit of the poem Bayonet Charge. It starts with an adverbial phrase. And when I think of an adverbial phrase all of a sudden, it makes me think that that the writer may have no control over the situation. So I'm going to start writing here like no control. Maybe feels a bit powerless. Because it's something that has happened without him being able to stop it. There was a frightful jarring and followed by a crash. Now, I really like the word frightful, okay? And even the word jarring is almost like, it's quite onomatopoeic. But I'm also going to go for the word crash. I think that straight away, I think that those two words are really important. Because I'm starting to notice a bit of a semantic field. I've got frightful, I've got a crash. And then I've got the word cannonaded. Like a cannon, think about Charge of the Light Brigade. Cannon to the left of them, cannon to the right of them, cannon behind them. I'm going to put here, I'm going to highlight that because all of this to me creates almost an image of violence. Now, if I was reading, I sat up in my berth, I might be like, I don't understand what berth is. Some of you in the classroom might know what that is. Some of you might not know. But ultimately, I can figure out that he sat up, probably in his carriage, the width of his carriage. So he's sitting up in his carriage. From the rack above me, my heaviest suitcase was cannonaded. So that idea of a cannon. So his suitcase falls on him, catching me with fearful force. Again, I like this use of alliteration here. Fearful force on either kneecap. So he's in a bit of pain. It hit him. Now, catching, I think, links a tiny bit to that idea of sudden. Like he has no control over what is happening. This is the end of the world. Now, you might want to go for this. This is a bit hyperbolic. Is he being a bit dramatic? Hyperbolic. I thought, and in addition, they have broken both my legs. Again, I would say a bit hyperbolic. My little world was tilted drunkenly. Now, I definitely got a bit of the use of personification here. The fact that his world is tilted drunkenly. The window showed me nothing except a few fields. It was 6 o'clock. I began to dress. I felt very much annoyed, but I climbed out of the carriage into a refreshingly spectacular world, and the annoyance passed. Now I'm going to use a different colour here because I feel like now the language is slightly changing. I've got this idea of a refreshing, spectacular world, and that shows that we've got a bit of a contrast with what is felt at the beginning. The Trans-Siberian Express train sprawled foolishly down the embankment. Now, you've got this idea of sprawled foolishly. So it suggests that the train is just a bit silly, that this is clumsy. That use of personification. I'm going to put personification. Yeah. So personification. The mail van and the dining cart, which had been in front, lay on the sides at the bottom. So you get description of where all the different sections of the train are. Behind them, the 5 sleeping cars, like cars are the sections of the train, headed by my own, were disposed in attitudes which became less and less grotesque. Now look at this. You've got again a personification of the carriage. They've got an attitude. And he's saying how it became less and less grotesque. I'm going to highlight that, less and less grotesque, suggesting that it wasn't that bad until you got to the last, which had remained primly on its rails, or on the rails. So again, like the train is almost personified as a person or a group of people that have fallen, but one still stands. Primly means like proper. 50 yards down the line, the engine, which had parted company with the train, was dug in, snorting steam. Now that's a lovely use of sibilance, snorting steam. It creates the sound of the engine, but I think as well it makes it seem a bit humorous. Of the embankment, it had a defiant and naughty look. It was definitely conscious of some indiscretion. So I feel that here I get a bit of a semantic field. So I've been highlighting this idea of being silly and foolish and almost human. You get a semantic field of clumsiness. However, at the beginning, you get more of a semantic field. So cannoned, crashed, fearful force, of like violence, maybe even kind of like damage and danger. Now, as you can see, I haven't annotated masses because I haven't got time. Now, your teacher might pause the video and pick on other things after my sample paragraph, but it's about you finding 2 to 3 things that you are going to analyze that then you can write some really, really good TP paragraphs about. Now, I'm going to focus on the fact that the writer does use contrasting semantic fields. I'm going to focus on a semantic field of violence, and then I'm going to write about a semantic field of clumsiness. But actually, I'm going to show you the way that throughout my analysis, I'm actually mentioning a range of techniques. So let's now go to writing my sample paragraph. Now, in my sample paragraph, I'm going to follow TP. Okay, so I've got the technique, evidence, purpose, effects, and I'm going to try and use my magic circles. So I'm going to start my answer with, because I'm going to talk about contrasting semantic fields, I am going to put that almost like a introduction sentence. So I don't always do that. If I was going for a grade 4, a grade 5, I wouldn't do that. I would actually if I was going for a grade 4 or a grade 5, I will straight away dive into a semantic field. I will just start writing about that. If I'm going for a 6, 7, 8, 9, I show that I have an understanding of the way that language is used across the source. So I'm going to start by saying the writer uses contrasting semantic fields to describe the writer's I want to put the train crash. To describe, I'm not going to put the writer there, so I'm changing that. To describe the different emotions caused by the train crash. Okay, so can you see? I was going to go to the writer, but actually the focus of my question is very much about the train crash. So I've got train crash, I've got train crash. Now remember, in the exam you are not allowed to highlight your own answer, but I want to do it just to show you how I'm constantly mentioning the train crash. Now I'm going to talk about firstly or initially. Initially, comma, the writer uses a semantic field of, I'm gonna go for that idea of violence and damage. Semantic field of violence and damage. So that's my technique. Semantic field of violence and damage. Through the words. So when you do a semantic field, you want to quote those words through the words. Now, when you're doing a semantic field, always try to quote at least 3 words. So through the words crash, I'm going to focus on the word crash. So going back to my answer, I had the word crash. I'm going to leave frightful at the moment. I'm going to put cannonaded, and I'm going to focus on fearful force. So I'm going to do that. Crash. Cannonaded. And fearful force. Now, this is why I left frightful. I left frightful because I'm using fearful force, and fearful and frightful are very similar words. So I've tried to use words that are slightly different, so then I can explore different ideas as I am writing my answer. Now I've done technique, I've got my evidence, and now I want to answer my purpose. So, like the writer, for purpose, the writer does this too. So, he does this to describe, I'm going to put the focus of the question, to describe the initial and sudden horror created by the train crash. So look at this. Now, the sudden horror, initial sudden horror created by the train crash, this is me answering the question. The train, like, what is the writer saying about the train crash? Now, already here, I have some marks. I mentioned a technique, I've evidenced that technique, and I've answered the question. So if I'm on 12 marks, it's a 12 marker, so I might have actually 2 marks out of 12 already, if not 3. Now look at the way that when I'm now doing my effects, so going back to my TP, what I do a lot is I'm doing like mini TPs by zooming in on words, mentioning other techniques, and developing my analysis. So look at what I'm going to do first. I'm going to focus on the word crash. I think the word crash is quite onomatopoeic. So I'm going to say, now if I didn't know that, I would just say the writer uses the word. But because I know it's onomatopoeic, I'm going to use that. Fleming, I know his name. Fleming uses the onomatopoeic word crash. Now, what I do, I can do it on the margins, or I can just do it in my head. When I think of the word crash, so I'm going to do here crash, a bit little, so crash. Crash makes me think of, so what does it make me think of? It makes me think of danger. It makes me think of damage. When I think something that has been damaged, I think that of something, I always like writing this in English, that is maybe something that is physical, like a physical experience, like a physical disturbance. It might also make me think a tiny bit of destruction. Maybe even a bit chaotic. Now, I might not use chaos. I might not use all of these ideas now for crash, but I'll use definitely some, okay? Because I might want to save some. I'm thinking of cannonaded, and I might want to use chaos for that, but let's see how I go. So Fleming uses the onomatopoeic word crash to create an image. So this is, but I'm saying he's using this word to create this. That's an effect. To create an image of danger. So I'm going to take my danger, and highlights now I was going to put damage, but actually I've already written damage, so I'm going to get rid of that one. Image of danger and highlights physical, and highlights the physical impact. So I'm going to just put that of the train crash. So making sure that I'm always answering the question. So the physical impact caused by the train crash. So making us think, I'm going to develop that, making us think. Look at the way that I'm talking about the effects on the reader, making us think, I am a reader, we are a reader, making us think of destruction, I am going to keep chaos actually, and chaos. And I take that. So I've said loads of things about one word. So if I wrote something like this in the exam, all of a sudden I would start hitting level 2. So that is between 4 and 6 marks. But I want to write more because I've got other words in my semantic field. So I use this connective. In addition, only time I think of maths. In addition, comma, I'm going to add more to my answer. The writer uses. Now, I can say the word cannonaded, okay? But when I think of cannons, I think of like warfare, I think of war. So I'm actually going to uses warfare imagery. So that's really nice to give another technique, warfare imagery. But if I said just another word, that is fine as well. Through the word, cannonaded, when Now I'm showing how, I'm going back to the word, how was that used? It was to do with my heavier suitcase was cannonaded down when the suitcase falls on the writer. Now I want to make sure that I'm answering what is that telling me about the train crash. Remember, I always want to talk about a train crash. So when the suitcase falls on the writer, to create an image of the confusion caused by the train crash. It creates, I'm thinking of, like, it talks about his legs. Let me just think, cannon. So I'm going to just do magic circle for cannon. So when I think of cannons, okay, and I'm thinking actually here of charge to the library gate, cannon to the left of them, cannon to the right of them, it makes me think of a battlefield. It makes me think, actually, of injuries. Oh, an attack. It makes me think of injuries. Pain. So, cannons make me think of battlefields and attack, injury, and pain. So I'm going to add that to my answer. So I've got cannonaded when the suitcase falls on the writer to create an image of confusion caused by the train crash. It creates the idea that the train crash has caused a battlefield. So I'm going to have as the writer is, I'm going to put the words attacked by his belongings, and this causes injuries and pain, emphasizing. So emphasizing, I'm going to need a bit more paper. I'm going to write here so that you guys can still see what I've written. So emphasizing the damage caused by the crash. Full stop. Now, this is where I can even go further. Not only did I zoom on the word crash, I've now done cannonaded. What other word did I have at the top of my answer? I also had, look at this, fearful falls. I can now talk about alliteration. Let's go for it. Now, before I zoom in on fearful falls, I might do some magic circles as well on, for example, force makes me think of power and strength. So I'm going to talk actually about how this symbolizes the power and strength of the train crash to disrupt the writer's journey. And then as well, I think that idea of fearful emphasizes that kind of like the writer's confusion and sense of feeling powerless in the journey. Now, year 11, because I'm literally actually analysing loads of techniques, zooming in on loads of things, I am definitely now, I would say, into that level 3. And this is why I'm talking about you write 2 to 4 detailed TP paragraphs, because for this question it's about development and range. You do want to have a range of techniques. You cannot get away with just analyzing one technique in this question. So I'm gonna do my last bit. Fleming uses alliteration in fearful force. Now, if you analyze alliteration, you have to talk about the F sound. So you might say the F sound emphasizes, or you might mention the fricative F, so that is the type of sound that it does. But if you're just not confident with that, we just can just say the use of the F sound. Now guys, think about the F word here. Like, why do we say that word? Is to emphasize the frustration. I'm thinking actually about what I wrote here. The frustration caused by the train crash. It also highlights, so I'm going to go for this one, its powerfulness. Highlights the power and force. So actually, and force. I don't want to use force because that's in my quote. Wait a minute. The power and strength of the train crash, comma, symbolizing so I've used actually most of my quotes now. Symbolize, oh, there you go, how the train crash has disrupted the peacefulness of the writer's journey. Full stop. So, by doing this, I'm probably now definitely on a level 3. So between 6 to 9 marks. What I would do next, and this is where you get your chance now, is I would then do in contrast or contrastingly, and then I would talk about the semantic field of clumsiness caused by that idea of the drunkenly. So, for example, I like the use of the word foolishly. That creates a comic tone. It suggests that there's something amusing about this crash. Then later, the train is described as defiant and naughty. Naughty makes me think of like something childlike. And again, that kind of overall suggests that the train crash was actually not that bad. So your teacher will pause the video now. You guys can discuss a few more ideas that you may have wanted to include in your answer.